be here in a few minutes. He's always late.
Which one?
Mike.
Oh.
You don't want to get up on me?
No. I think it's going to be a long meeting.
Go for it, Sam.
I have a habit of being late. Let it go. It doesn't work that way. Okay. I'll call this meeting of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency Board of Directors together to order, and ask clerk to call the roll, please.
Chair Craven.
Here.
Director Zaragoza.
Here.
Director McIntyre.
Here.
Okay. Mr. Zaragoza, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Yes, please follow me.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, agenda review.
Chair, a couple of your board members have requested item 7 be pushed to the July meeting.
Item 7, and Director Kelly just walked in.
I'd rather he be in the hot seat.
Okay. Is there any objection to pushing item 7 out to the next meeting? Okay, so ordered.
And one other item, there has been a requested correction to the minutes that esteemed Clerk Nobriga will describe for you.
Can you please refer to item number 1, page 5 of 6. Last paragraph reads, Mr. Steve Nash, comma, City of Oxnard, should read Mr. Steve Nash, comma, Oxnard resident.
Okay. Anything else under agenda review?
That's it?
Okay. You know what? I need to get on the agenda and not the minutes here. Okay, public comments. I don't have any cards, but I guess we don't put cards out. Is there anyone who'd like to speak to the board on an item that's not on the agenda? Come on forward. Come on down. Just state your name for the record, please.
Bert Perlow, resident of Oxnard, Chair, Commissioners. I would like to address my concern specifically is item 7 has been pulled off the credit status report. I've limitedly attended your meetings. I haven't been religiously following, but off and on I do attend and I read the packets. These are my concerns. We have various individuals that represent various parts of the county with overseeing this Fox Canyon Groundwater Water Agency. I'm a resident of the City of Oxnard. The City of Oxnard recently has taken some actions which I believe conflict with the interests of this Fox Canyon Groundwater Board. And I've been in attendance at these meetings where I've heard the majority of the decision makers decide not to do anything on these credits. I believe you need to go back and start paying much closer attention to how my particular city is dealing with the water credits. Maybe pay attention to how your particular city is dealing with the water credits, and maybe your neighbors. Maybe you need to look around and see what's going on. My concerns are these. City of Oxnard recently turned down a peaker plant because Edison Company was requesting a limited amount of water. Last Tuesday, 2 Tuesdays ago, they approved a 1,500 home project, 11,000 people, no questions about the water. The City of Oxnard has, on their past, been told that there is a problem with the excessive amounts of credits that the City of Oxnard has. With the issue of the excessive amounts of credits and no progress being made how these credits are going to be drawn, I equate it to something similar to this. Everybody comes to the kitchen table, we have one pitcher of water, and everybody gets a straw the same size. And then you invite a guest in and he's got a straw 6 times the size of you. And he has no limit on how much he can pull out of that water because he has unlimited amount of credits compared to what's in the pool. At City Council meetings, questions have been asked. Is there any supply for the city of Oxnard? Storage supply? After much prolonged waiting for an answer, the answer is no. There is no underground storage supply for the city of Oxnard. A lot of hope is being pinned on the GREAT program. A lot of hope. It may work out beneficial, but I would like to tell you, don't believe me. Go to the City of Oxnard's planning website. 11,000 residential units, homes, have been approved. Not yet constructed, approved. Several thousand more are in the pipeline to be approved. Is the water ample to supply the residents of Oxnard? Now, not just my city. How about the people that you represent? Is the water there for the people you represent? If you don't deal with this, I believe you will be forced to deal with it with angry constituents who you represent. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Perrello. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to us on an item that's not on the agenda? Moving on to board member comments. I'd like to wish everybody a happy summer. It's the first day of summer. That's the extent of my comments. Okay. Approval of the minutes. We had a requested change in the minutes.
And I'd like to abstain from that.
We can't do that just because we weren't here. We have to have read the minutes,
No, I'll approve the minutes as
the minutes
submitted.
and the
Okay.
agenda, so that.
I'll second the approval of the minutes.
Okay. So motion and second, and that was as amended, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Were you here for when he read the amendment?
It's in the back there, yes.
Okay, okay. I just want to make sure. It was very easy. I'd have him read it again. Motion to approve the minutes.
So approved.
Aye.
Okay. Motion carries unanimously. Item number 2 is an informational item, Las Posas Basin Specific Groundwater Management Plan Status. Could we have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair Craven, and good afternoon to the rest of the directors. For the record, Brian Bondi with United Water and the GMA. And item 2 is our monthly update on the progress of the Las Posas Basin Specific Planning effort. A little update or correction to the board letter. We had anticipated having a users group meeting, Las Posas users group meeting in June this morning. We elected to cancel that meeting in favor of continuing to make progress on actual writing of the document. Basically, we felt that we had largely reached a saturation point in our discussions of the issues and that the time would be best spent to actually work on putting pencil to paper and getting something more formally written up that folks could start working with and commenting on. So that's where we're at. There was no meeting this month and therefore no update on the users group progress. In terms of our overall schedule for developing the basin plan, I still would make the comment that I feel we're on track. We have about 3.5 months to write this plan, go through the process of comment and review and getting stakeholder buy-in at the users group. I remain confident that we can do that in the time frame. We'll go through the process and we'll keep you up to date as things progress and let you know if we're going to remain on schedule or more time's needed. 2 other issues I want to briefly update you on that are related to the issues in the Las Posas Basin. First, as you may recall, the primary means of solving our issues in the basin is going to be development of that shallow groundwater resource, the marginal quality water that we have there that's continually recharged by the wastewater inflows from Simi Valley and Moore Park. The basin plan will probably not allocate that resource initially. We'll probably identify that as a task that needs to be completed post-plan adoption. There's some engineering studies that need to be completed to better quantify those flows, figure out how to develop that resource and move the water through the basin. So it's probably not an appropriate time frame to develop allocations for those flows. Nonetheless, as you might imagine, individual entities are going about their processes of figuring out how to develop projects that would make use of that water. So we sort of have, on the one hand, people trying to figure out how to develop the resource. On the other hand, a basin planning process that needs to allocate that overall resource for the benefit of the basin. So you'll see in item 8H-4 that staff made some comments to this effect on Ventura County Waterwork District Number 1's Urban Water Management Plan. Basically just wanting to remind them that as they look forward at potentially developing a desalter project to make use of that water, that they need to be part of the overall planning process. So that was more of a reminder note for them and for the water community at large in the Las Posas Basin Plan. We'll also be looking at existing GMA policies to make sure that those are in line with how the basin planning process has progressed. In particular, there is a resolution 2003-03 that discusses how the shallow groundwater might be allocated. We'll be looking at that to see if there's any updates that need to be made to that to make it consistent with the current planning process. The second issue that I wanted to raise to you was an issue where we found an ad for a real piece of real property in the East Las Posas Basin. As you look at the ad, you can see that it's very strongly worded to the effect that there's no government control in this area and that there's basically plenty of water to develop, I think it says 482 acres of currently unplanted land. This property is located within the East Las Posas Basin. This red line is our GMA boundary. The property owner has 2 wells that are within the agency, 1 well that is just outside of the agency. So this was an obvious concern once it came to our attention. We did the research, discovered what parcels were involved, what wells were involved, and to make a long story short, we have put the property owner on notice that they are to comply with all agency requirements for their 2 wells within the agency. There's a broader, larger story behind it that I won't take the time to explain, but suffice it to say, we are working through this issue, and this may be a matter that ultimately comes before your board as we learn more. And this is of obvious importance to the basin planning process as we're going through a procedure, a process to try and allocate and balance pumping with supply to have issues like this that come up that could potentially significantly increase water demand is an obvious concern.
Brian, did you see the ad this last Sunday?
Yes.
Now it's one
well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the realtor got the letter.
They're still claiming that the well that's in the expansion zone is void of any government control.
But they can't come and tell us that they didn't get the letter.
The property owner is an absentee owner there in Oklahoma, and it was a P.O. box, so we'll follow up and make sure that they get the communication. That concludes my update unless there's any questions.
Any questions? Okay, is there a motion to receive and file the report?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second, receive and file. Any objection? So ordered. Okay, update on outreach and ordinance code changes regarding irrigation allowance index. Can we have a staff report on that, please?
Good afternoon, Chair Craven and directors. For the record, my name is Rick Birgutz. I'll be presenting today's item, update on outreach and ordinance code changes regarding irrigation allowance index. So our last update to your board was in April. Just a minute. There it goes. There are a number of recommendations that Dr. Stiles made to move forward with the Irrigation Allowance Index program, and what I'll be doing is telling you how we're doing on taking care of those issues, and then there were some other issues that we still need to do. These weren't Dr. Stiles' recommendations, but we need to update the ordinance and update the agency software. So let me just start at number 1. Regarding weather station relocation, Dr. Stiles recommended we relocate 3 of the weather stations and also reprogram some weather stations, reprogram all 5 of them. So we've requested and received a proposal from our contractor, David Peak, to do that work. And we continue on our effort with locating weather station locations that meet standard CIMAS requirements. 3 of the stations will need to be moved, and that's a recommendation from Dr. Stiles, so we're looking to find 3 more locations, and I can talk about that more in item 4 today. As far as the public outreach goes, we've selected meeting locations and reserved dates: the morning of August 24th at the Camarillo Airport and the morning of September 8th at Callegas. The notification of the workshops will go out in the semi-annual newsletter. One of the issues that came up following our April presentation to your board is that it might be a good idea to see if Dr. Stiles is available to come to these workshops. So in addition to a recent request for proposal that we sent him, we also asked for a price to do that. So we'll be back at your board in July to talk about this.
Rick, do you know when Dr. Faber's coming back from his sabbatical?
Last I heard it was August.
So it'd be really helpful, I think, if he was there, because he's probably going to be the one who coordinates, the hands-on stuff after Stiles is back in San Luis Obispo.
That's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can get a better return date for him.
Yeah. Because if he hears Stiles' presentation, then he'll know what everybody's been told. Otherwise he'll come in and have a slightly different way of saying it maybe or something.
Well, that's a good point. And if I suppose if Dr. Stiles isn't able to be at these workshops, we could always have Dr. Faber get a hold of his slides, or maybe look at his presentation from the video that was taken.
Thank you.
The second bullet, so the outreach is essentially going to be geared towards providing information and training to use the new system, and also providing information and receiving feedback about the required ordinance code change. And as far as the ordinance code change goes, we want it to coincide more with the workshops. Earlier we thought we'd be here today with the draft red line strikeout version of the ordinance, but we want to roll the ordinance out a little bit more slowly with the workshops. The idea is that we'll get a better product and get feedback from the growers. Moving down the line, we plan to bring the first reading to your board in September. Then we'll issue the public notice in October and bring the second reading to your board in October for adoption. Software revisions, we'll be issuing a scope of work to IT services in September for this. We'll draft that scope in August after we're done with some of the busy time that we go through when we send out the semi-annual statements and follow up. The purpose of that work would be to modify the IE calculations. I can tell you that we're testing the system right now, and that the functionality is working. We're able to enter the IE forms and draw maps and do all the things that we expected to be able to do. And we'll return to your board as early as October with the proposal from IT services. We've got a little bit of float in the schedule on this, so if we don't come back in October, we'll come back soon thereafter. For context, this will need to be online in January of 2013. And relating to Dr. Stiles, we sent a request for proposal to Dr. Stiles in mid-June. We've asked him to provide us a cost and his availability to make a presentation or 2 presentations, 1 at each workshop. Also, as we move forward with public outreach and workshops, we're going to get questions, highly technical questions that we're going to need to forward to Dr. Stiles. I don't know how many we're going to get or when they're going to come in, but we do want to get a cost from him to respond to those and get back with us. With those responses, we'll turn around and we'll update our workshops. We'll update the agency website as we develop a better understanding. And finally, one of Dr. Stiles' recommendations was to conduct quality control for the first year. So we're asking for cost to do that. And we'll also need to know if we need to change the crop categories and the cost for that, and also determination of the need to change the ETIW in the cost. And the ETIW is the amount of evapotranspiration that the crops use during the growing season. Dr. Stiles thought that we might want to look at that the first year and potentially revise it. So we're on track with meeting the goals. We will continue to work with Robert Fasteneau and willing landowners to find new weather station locations. And forgive me, I didn't mention earlier, we mentioned it at the last meeting, but Robert Fasteneau is our state CIMAS coordinator. And I'll mention...
Rick, where's he, is he here in Ventura County, or does he dispatch out of Sacramento?
He lives in Ventura County, he works in Glendale, and he does handle this area and other areas in the Southern California region. And we will continue to provide regular updates to your board. So that's what I have. Our recommendation is to receive and file, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Motion to receive and file?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
The motion is second to receive and file. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Carries unanimously. Okay, action items. Number 4, contract with Investment Signals LLC for weather station relocation and additional programming. Could we have a staff report on that, please?
Good afternoon, Chair Craven, directors. For the record, Rick Virgutz, Fox Canyon GMA. I'll be presenting item number 4 today. Contract with Investment Signals for weather station relocation and additional programming. And it looks like I'm waiting for the slides to come up.
We're waiting for that, Rick. Mr. Peak is not here today, is he?
No, he is not.
Okay. The Olitas Park is not one we pay for, is it?
I don't believe so.
Because it's reported, but it's not listed as a part of the 5.
It's not listed as one of the 5?
Is listed.
It is listed as one of the 5.
Oh, no, I retract that. It's not. It's listed of all the reported stations, but not where he does the allowed water.
Okay.
So it's just that station seems so inconsistent with everything else. I think the thing is way off, but that's just my opinion.
Okay. I can't hear you. Okay, excellent. So in April, a request for proposal was provided to Investment Signals to arrange for the 2 changes. And we received it and reviewed it. We're recommending 2 of the 3 proposed parts. I'll mention the 3rd part a little bit later, but that was briefly to add an additional rain gauge to each of the station. The cost is $3,850 to add the additional programming that Dr. Stiles recommends, and $350 each to relocate the weather stations. So $350 for each weather station relocation. We've been looking into this, and we've got a game plan to find the locations, but early on we started contacting consultants to see if they could help us. We didn't have a lot of luck. A number of them said that finding a location that meets all the CIMAS requirements is very difficult. We wondered if we could bend on that a little bit, some of those requirements. We talked to Dr. Stiles. He doesn't recommend we bend on it. He suggested we look at golf courses, which is consistent with what his Task 2.2 report says. It doesn't specifically recommend that we locate the stations in certain crop areas. And he also recommended that we work with Robert Fastenaw of the state, and we've been doing that. By the way, the 3 golf courses that he recommended were the Moore Park Country Club, the Sterling Hills Golf Course, and the CB Golf Course in Port Hueneme. So we've met with Mr. Fastenaw June 6th. I spent a while in the field with him looking at different sites. We had a tour of the Moore Park Country Club. We found a good location there. He is in the process of getting that location approved. There's a process that he uses where he sends the location information to Sacramento, and they will bless it as a station location that will meet the CIMAS requirements. So we're continuing to work to find willing hosts for the weather stations. When we do that, we'll need to develop access agreements with them. As far as the additional calculation goes, that's needed as a check or a backup. It's one of Dr. Stiles' recommendations. And the additional calculation will be available on the agency website. You might recall with the way the program is structured now, the Irrigation Allowance Index program, these types of calculations are not going to be needed when the filing is done. But we'll still make them available on the website until we determine that it's no longer necessary. The two key things that are needed with the filing will be the annual rainfall and the zone that, the weather zone that the crop exists in. Since rainfall is so important, we did ask David Peak to give us a price to put an extra tipping bucket or rain gauge on the weather stations, but we're not sure that's the right approach now. As we've looked into it, we're thinking that it might make more sense to use some of the county hydrology section's data. They operate 22 rain gauges in the area. 11 of them are telemeter. They record the data electronically. And those stations could be used to provide an even better data set for the rainfall. So we're working with them. It's not a slam dunk. Unfortunately, the county hydrology section totals their rainfall on the USGS water year, which ends on September 30th. The GMA uses a calendar year. So that would require an additional QA/QC step for them. So we're working on that, and I'll have more to report later. But the current thinking is we don't want to go with the second rain gauge at this point. So, in summary, we recommend approval of the contract, which is item 4C in your staff report, to authorize items A and B from Investment Signals LLC, and B, that the funds for this be included under the ET data contract line in the recommended final budget. And that's item 6 today. Fiscal expenditures would occur in the first or second quarter of 11-12, and the total is $4,900.
Any questions? Yes.
Rick, that September anniversary date, actually, I mean, I was thinking July 1. We've talked about it numerous times. Would there be any momentum within the agency staff to switch our year to correspond with the September year rather than the January 1 year end?
Well, to tell you the truth, I'd have to kick that over to Dr. Stiles, since he did all that work and he designed
the problem
it for
we're
a
seeing,
calendar year.
every time you go to add it up, you put a real wet spring with a very dry following fall, which not uncommonly occurs, and you've got a half decent year out of the thing if you cross, but you're 50% under for half of the year and 50% over for the other half of the year. Well, that makes a hell of a good year. No, wrong answer.
Yeah, I understand, and I had that discussion with one of the gentlemen from the hydrology section, and if your board asks us to do that, we could certainly talk with Dr. Stiles about doing that.
It's not going to cost us to talk, is it?
Probably not.
Not a lot.
The question is, can I get a hold of him?
Any other questions? Okay, this is an action item. What's the direction of the board? Oh, I didn't ask. Sorry. I've been accused of trying to push the meetings too fast. Is there any member of the public who'd like to speak to us on this item? Okay. Now, what are the wishes of the board?
Madam Chairman, I would move that we accept staff's recommendation and proceed with the contract.
Second?
And I agree, I second that.
Okay, is there any discussion on the item now that we have a motion and a second?
The only question I would have, Rick, again, this is still subject to the same thing you confirmed to me before, that we have an escape clause on all of our contracts with Mr. Peak. Is that not true?
I'll double check on this one, but I certainly believe it is.
I mean, when we did the annual...
Al is nodding.
I didn't see his head bob left to right or up and down.
Al?
Yes, there is a provision in the contract that allows the agency to terminate.
Yes, it's number 6.
Okay.
60 days?
I think that's fine. It's just as this thing's moving along, I think increasingly we find that Mr. Peak's activities have been less than accurate sometimes, so we may move away from him, in my mind, in the future some way.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any dissensions? Motion carries unanimously. He sat up here. Before Director Kelly came. He answered yes to hear. Oh, I'm sorry. Alternate Schwabauer is also here. Okay. I thought you meant Sam. Okay. Item number 5, confirmation of agency's current biennial financial audit preparation schedule. Do we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and for the record, Gerard Kapusik with the agency staff and Watershed Protection District. Your board has asked us to come back to you with a staff report, essentially, as we understand it, focusing on 3 questions with respect to continuing with the current biannual audit preparation schedule as opposed to moving to some other frequency, particularly an annual schedule. During the April 27th, 2011 regular board meeting, the results of the most recent agency biannual audit covering the years 2008-09 and 2009-10 were presented to your board, and that audit was received and filed by your board at that time. During the course of that meeting, as indicated at the bottom of page 1 of 4 of the board letter and the very top of page 2 and 4, 3 questions were proposed to staff to go to ground on, and that is, first of all, confirm that the decision made by the Board of Supervisors back in March of 1983 in response to the then agency's request for a biannual versus an annual audit schedule was still valid legally. The second question was to provide an estimate of the potential cost that might be incurred by the agencies if your board chose to move to an annual versus the biannual schedule, and in particular any additional costs associated with increased standards and requirements for the agency's audits. And the third question was to confirm consultations with the County Auditor's Controller's Office regarding the degree of flexibility that the board or the agency has in effectively driving the scope of how you scope an audit and select the auditor controllers as an independent agency distinct from the county. The staff report that is in your packet attempts to address those 3 questions. I'll summarize and then answer any questions that you may have, and then it would be appropriate for your board to deliberate either confirmation of the current schedule or moving to an annual schedule. With respect to the first question, does the decision of the Board of Supervisors reached back in March of '83 agreeing to the agency's request for a biannual schedule still valid? The answer is yes. By operation of law, until your board requests a change in that schedule, it remains valid. And the second question was if we moved to an annual audit preparation schedule, some idea of the rough order of magnitude of what the cost might be. The answer to that question is essentially outlined in 2 major tables on page 3 of 4 of the board letter. First, just for purposes of reciting the history, the table mid-page identifies the audit preparation costs and the escalation thereto for the last 3 cycles covering 6 fiscal years. We have looked at the requirements of the agency's audit, and those are driven primarily by, almost exclusively, by the state controller's minimum standards, minimum audit requirements, reporting guidelines for special districts, and while those standards have reflected the increased reporting, given the nature of the kind of reporting the agency does, there's been relatively little increased cost associated with that. We simply have to comply with those standards regardless of the frequency of the audit or which auditors are chosen. So the escalation in cost appears to us as primarily driven by market response of the auditors choosing to respond to the RFPs and the selections there too. We've taken a stab at looking at what the cost might be if we moved, and it appears from the discussion with a variety of CPAs in the county that about 20 to 30% of these costs generally are fixed, and to the extent you can spread them over more than 1 year, you may get some savings. And the table at the bottom of the page references that. The most recent annual audit, of course, cost us $49.50. For purposes of planning, we thought it might be $5,500. If you move to 2 annual audits, it would be $6,400, $3,200 a year. So roughly a $900, 15% cost savings appears to be the case of the biannual schedule rather than the annual schedule. Conversely, when you have an annual schedule, you are dealing with these numbers more fresh each year. And so it's really up to your board whether you are comfortable with the current schedule or wish to move to an annual schedule. If you do, we're just giving you some indication of what might be the order of magnitude of costs as we best can see that. The last question was in consultation with the auditor controllers. It is sometimes a little difficult. We forget that there's a number of folks involved in this agency. Obviously, we are agency staff, and agency staff includes the Public Works Agency Central Services Department, supporting the executive officer on financial and accounting, and myself working with them to bring these items to you. Essentially what has happened in the past and continues to happen is the auditor controller generally comes up with a pool of auditors who would be responders. So they sort of control that process, if you will, or stewards of that process. But in discussions with the Auditor Controller's Office, it became more apparent to us that we really drive the scope, and we could drive it further if we so chose, meaning your board and agency staff. And in conversation with the executive officer, we're certainly prepared to do that if your board wishes that we do that. Once that scope is determined, it just goes out. The auditor essentially processes the responses and then gives us back the return of that response. But it's up to the executive officer to decide who the auditor would be, subject to the response to the scope. So however you wish to drive that process as is, increase it, we have the capacity to do that, and the auditor controller would be willing to work with us in that regard. And I believe there was one question, now that I'm thinking about it, that I didn't address on the board, but I think you asked Chairwoman Craven, is the county schedule. And the county schedule is annual for a variety of reasons, large-scale, complex transactions, and what have you. And in fact, absent the agency's request for a biannual, the default schedule for the agency would be annual. So if you wish to move to that, you certainly have the ability to do that by simply directing that that's the case. With that, I think I've concluded the attempt to answer your questions. I'd be happy to answer any more, but at this point, after you've had your deliberations, it would be appropriate to either confirm or change the schedule as your board decides.
Any questions? I have one question for you or the attorney, because unanimous is in italics. Does that have to be by unanimous for everybody who's in attendance, or do we have to have a full board?
It would be a full board required.
So we cannot take action today?
Well, if an action is going to be taken, which would or could include affirmation of the biennial versus annual audit requirement, the answer is no, you could not take that action. So,
and for the record, he has been in the audience for the entire report. Yeah, I will. I just wanted to get this one squared away. Okay. Are there any other questions? Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak to us on this item? I thought you had come up to speak, Henry.
Simply to give you a full board.
Oh, okay. You answered my question about the county. I think that's all the questions I had. No other questions. Okay, it's time for discussion.
The thing that brought it to our attention last time, of course, is the wide oscillation of the income and outflow that this agency has experienced. And, you know, I think you provided us the information. It just was interesting. You know, at the end of the year, we were $3 million over, and now we're going to be having heart attacks on Chairman Mulhart's behalf for next year. So from a planning standpoint, do you see any advantages of going to the annual other than the $900 savings or loss?
$450 a year, though.
Yeah.
From a strictly mechanical practitioner standpoint, the more current and quick we get the data, the more we can deal with it. So if that is valued at least the differential in cost price by your board, that would be an advantage in moving to an annual schedule. I will say to you that in terms of the oscillation, as your board is well aware, that's primarily driven by the two major settlement agreements as a result of disputes, bringing in a considerable amount of revenue that your board then in part earmarked for GEMS and earmarked for specific purposes. And when we get into the budget discussion, I'm not sure that I would characterize the issue quite the way you did, but there is, I think, a feeling that the oscillation is somehow driven as opposed to a reaction to those two events. And the five out-year budget discussion are really planning. What we're really focusing is on a given budget year next year, and we revisit each year with you the 5-year outgrowth. So to me, from a practitioner standpoint, that would be the most salient advantage of moving to an annual
It's just
schedule.
I didn't see much movement towards trimming back the sales for the down year, you know. I mean, it's the same problem the state of California got in. They spent the heck out all the money they had on a good year, and then they had Zippo in a bad year. So I would, hopefully this agency might move in a more prudent manner.
Okay, I have another question, now that you've asked, made your comment. The auditors and the annual report are two different things. We prepare the annual report, and they audit the numbers in them. So if we're going to have, since 1983, there have been two separate annual reports that have been audited at the same time. Those annual reports are prepared together at the end of the second year, or each year and then looked at?
Let's make sure we're on the same page on the terminology annual report. There effectively is an agency annual report, which is on a calendar year basis.
I'm talking about the annual report that the auditors look at the numbers.
They're prepared at one point in time covering the previous two fiscal years.
Okay. Gives a better answer to your question.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Zaragoza.
I'm just reading the 1983 report going into the biennial, and the reason it was requested because the agency had a very small budget at the time and limited amount of transactions and financial transactions. We have more now, obviously. So
$24,000 is what they had.
at the time. So I'm just wondering, maybe, I'm just thinking out loud, maybe an annual might be probably best, you know, is that what we
I think if we go back to the beginning of this discussion, my concern was that with 2-year delay in having an audit, it was longer, and this is the age of public transparency.
That's right.
And I was concerned that we weren't having that with a biannual audit. And here we are a few months later. So
It seems that the cost savings is not significant enough. I personally, and I appreciate your opinion, sitting on other boards, the thing would be better done on a more regular basis, quite frankly. I don't know. I would appreciate other opinions.
I would just cut to the chase, and I would just recommend and make a motion that we move into an annual review or an annual audit, and that the expense of $450 a year is a blink of an eye, honestly. And it just gives us more transparency and correct information that if somebody needs it, it's available and it's audited.
I would be happy to second that. I would concur wholeheartedly. Just from my experience with other boards, I mean, we really need to move to an annual system. And I think Director Craven's correct. It's an issue of transparency.
And I agree, you know, after looking at this memo, $24,000 then was minimal dollars, but the $400 some dollars is minimal for the cost. So I agree with that.
don't forget there's an inflation factor.
I
don't know. But it was a very small budget back then.
That's right.
Okay, any other comments on the motion?
Madam Chair, just to ask a question of council, it might be, would it behoove the board to include in this motion requesting? Does the board have to go back to the supervisors to get this approval, to undo that action, or it seems to me if it would be helpful to do that at the same time.
There would not be that requirement. It would revert to the annual requirement under the government code.
There you go.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
Call for the question.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Now, adoption of the fiscal year 2011-12 recommended final annual work plan and budget. We have the staff report, please.
Okay, first of all, let me just, in the interest of full disclosure, say that I've learned my lesson, and I've asked my colleague, Brian Bondi, to review all these slides before we finalize them. So since we allowed him, since I got him to do that on his previous higher cost for 10-11, we had some savings to the agency. So, and then also as a consequence of that review, he's cheaper in 11-12, which we'll get to in a moment. So I think this might be, under the county's Lean Six Sigma, just do it cost savings and process improvement. So I just want to disclose that for the interest and thank him sincerely as well as joking with him. The presentation today there we go. Should be pretty brisk, and the intent here is to simply identify the changes from the draft preliminary presented in the budget study session, of which there were a few, and you've also made one today about the contract for LLC, which we'll have to deal with. Overview the key performance metrics in the budget and answer any questions, and then your board is prepared to deliberate and adopt either as is or as you wish to change it. This slide just simply summarizes the annual work plan in terms of staffing. The proposal is 2.34 full-time equivalents. And again, to refresh all our memory, a full-time equivalent is the work effort represented by 1,800 productive hours of work. To provide core services, just a little under 1 FTE dedicated for 6 additional tasks as a result of your board's direction to remove the LGAP grant from the budget until you make that determination. The proposed level of effort in terms of work plan is about 1.3 FTEs less than that which we performed in 10-11. And if your board will recall, we did a lot of legacy cleanup work in 10-11, which is why that item was elevated in 10-11. It's projected to be ramped down. Let me just say that these are all projections, because especially when your board assigns us, it's very difficult before the fact to link and cap there, because we're dealing with this changed environment. So
you're saying we add all this after we've approved the budget?
Yes. Thank you. We are projecting in the work plan a little bit of cost savings because, as you know, with the transfer of Dave Pinaro to the hydrology section, the staff geologist position is vacant, and given government, it takes us time to fill those positions. So the schedule here is probably mid-year or so. So we've built in that some savings. The last bullet is kudos to our friend Mr. Bondi here. In his review of the letter, he discovered that the previous fiscal information from the Comptroller of United was based on his pre-management characterization, earning overtime, and in fact, when he became the promotion in the management, he's no longer. So we gained the benefit of $5,000 in savings for his, well, we gained 2 benefits, moving him from a 50% share to a third with the 3 agencies, and then, of course, this incremental. So that's the major change, and we just wanted to highlight that. As you can see, we removed from the 7 additional work tasks the DWR pending your action at the next meeting, but it's not in the cost, but it's there should you decide to put it back in, so we can deal with that. Again, to begin to answer your question, Director Kelly, we are looking at, as we work through these legacy issues, of something on the order of about a $500,000 core cost of staffing for continuation of the agency. And that is closer to the historical average before we did the ramp-ups on these projects. So this is at least from staff's projection in terms of our internal, that ramping down to the core. But whether we are able to achieve that is in great measure a dynamic process between ourselves, your board's direction, and what we encounter. But that's the case in terms of the core. And it's important to understand that there's a considerable amount of the core costs involved in dealing with the board meetings, the stakeholders, the documentation, and our databases and our records and our groundwater management. So about 50% of the core costs are administrative and records. That's the nature of the business, and there's a certain amount we can save, and we constantly look at that. But that's the case, given the rules that we have to play by under the existing legislation and the current environment. We have made, as indicated, the additional cost changes, additional task changes. We've deleted the LGAP, which was estimated about $90,000. We did not remove that from the base cost just to give us some flexibility in terms of redirecting those dollars to other work plan efforts. If your board feels strongly, we can, but at this point the costs are there, but the task is not. This slide just identifies that when we do our annual work plan, it's a combination of the county staff, which are the PWAC charges, agency counsel's time, which is at a higher hourly rate, and the JTSP time. But for planning purposes, it rolls up to the hours identified and a blended cost rate of about $114 an hour. But of course, that depends on which mix of staff we're using in any given case. This table just summarizes the PWAC component, meaning the Public Works Agency, not including Brian and not including County Council's hours, over the last 10 fiscal years. And as you can see, the ramp up in fiscal 10-11 projected, it looks like about 7,000 hours of work effort will have been expended this current fiscal year, just ending at just around 670,000. So that was a considerable ramp up. In next year, we are projecting just shy of 5,000 hours, back to that cost level of about 546,000. This just gives us a comparison on the left-hand side of the core services hours, FTEs, and costs this year in blue, and projected in the 11-12 budget on the right. And the projections are well within the range of the historical core costs of the agency. The bump up in 10-11 was primarily the legacy issue working, and of course we have a reduction in the JTSP from 50% of his hours we pay for to a third of his hours. And this just simply compares what the projection of this year is versus next. This is another way to look at the information. First, just dealing with core costs. The pie chart on the left shows what the projected distribution amongst those four major categories are this year, and what they would be in the 11-12 recommended budget. And you can see again confirmation graphically that a considerable amount of our effort is involved in the administration records and groundwater management database information, and that continues to be the case with core costs. When you factor in county councils and the joint technical position in terms of the additional costs, the lime green portion of both charts, you see how that impacts the distribution between the left-hand side, which is the current year, and the recommended file for the next year. But again, this is based on the annual work plan projection, and it's subject to change, as has always been the case. Now, this is a table that we got into trouble last time because it hadn't been updated. The version got swapped, but we certainly went through this. So let's walk through this together to make sure that we're all on the same page. Based on what we know of through May 31st of this year, our best projection of the year-end fund balance on June 30th of this year is just shy of $2 million, $1,922,000. But per your board's direction, $500,000 of that is taken off the books, so to speak, for purposes of funding next year's budget and beyond. And when you do that, that leaves us $1.4 million, just a little over that, available to fund 11-12 costs, sort of in the cash in the balance of the account on July 1st. Then we are projecting in next year to receive $825,000 in operating revenues in three major components. $520,000 from pump charge based on the long-term average. We did, of course, have a dip in that this last year, but for budget purposes, we confirmed with your board and you agreed that we budget at the long-term average and see what happens. Interest earnings, as you're well aware, it's down considerably. Surcharge revenues is very conservative. It's simply as identified on page 3 of the board letter in more detail, the two major settlement payments that are in place. The last payment on the Thornhill-Miller settlement is due by June 30th, 2011 in the amount of $110,000, so that will complete that. The next payment in the Howling Nursery settlement is in there, and then roughly a $30,000 estimate of surcharge and penalties for non-Howling Thornhill-Miller pumpers. So we believe that's a conservative surcharge estimate and a sound one to base on the budget. So when we add those two elements, there's approximately $2.2 million available for financing in 11-12. Then we start to deduct the cost, just over $500,000 for the core work plan costs, another $150,000 for additional the non-labor cost estimates. And the main driver of that, as identified in the budget, is roughly $335,000 in the GSAP payments in terms of the scheduling of those grants that have milestones due in 11-12. And then has been the current practice or historical practice of the board to keep a $100,000 reserve for operating contingencies in the budget. Would leave us a estimated requirements of 1.371. When you subtract that from the 2.2, you get the numbers on the bottom, $874,000 available for subsequent year fundings, and then $500,000 plus $2,000 of that interest balance attributable to GEMS, a total of $1.376 million. And I would just call one last attention to page 6 of 7 on the board letter. There was a question about why do we continue to include in our budgets $100,000? Is that conservative? Is that too conservative? Is it what's happening? We have historically included in the board letter the table that shows why we include in the budget base $100,000 contingency. Some years we have used it, some we have not. When it's not used, or whatever is not used, always augments the year-end fund balance, so it doesn't go away. It simply increases that. But it's prudent budgeting, given the dynamic nature of what we do, to have a contingency built into the base budget. The proposal is to continue that at $100,000, but in terms of looking at the future, that is within the margin of how we've operated. So your board can drive that number any other way that you wish, with the appropriate impacts, but that is the rationale behind it and how it's been used. So I think with that, just to confirm, if in fact everything happens as projected in next June 30th, that's what the distribution of the projected year-end budget would be. Approximately balance would be 64% would be available to fund 12-13 costs and beyond, and $502,500 would be in the GEMS reserve with the imputed interest earnings on that account. So I think with that, we're ready to answer any questions that you may have, and hopefully you're set up for deliberation and adoption.
Any questions?
My question
It looks much better, thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Director
Thank you for your patience and understanding.
Gerard, if you were projecting 12-13 at this point, do you see us having to try to find other financing sources, or are we going to be able to run the following year? Or should we trim the current year back a bit more?
As from a practitioner, based on the budget model identified there, I think we're okay for 12-13, but I do, as indicated in the board letter, I think it's wise for this board to schedule a study session sometime in 11-12 between mid-year and the third quarter. The reason I say the third quarter, because that's basically when we get the bulk of our revenue for the year by that point, to look at out years beyond. But I think we're okay for 11-12 and 12-13, and really 13-14. But I think it's prudent for your board to consider that, and that would be one part of the recommendations for your adoption today.
Just to confirm, you're using the pumping acre-foot number to be 130,000 a year?
For strictly projection purposes, that's 97% of the long-term average. You could certainly tell us, no, we think last year is a dip, so go lower, but understand as you go lower, that reduces revenue, so we would have to draw from fund balance, which is certainly, if that's what you wish to do, we can, but that's what the rationale is for using it. Because, you know, basically, you're going to have dips and valleys, as, well, you've identified this in terms of revenue, but for groundwater pumping, it's, you know, that's why long-term average tends to smooth out, so. But if you're not comfortable with that, we can certainly use another number.
No, just something to, as a footnote, because that makes a big swing real fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much so. Very much so.
Yes.
Well, just a comment too on that, I think it's something to be thinking of as we look to the future. If we talk about the basin being in overdraft now, and if we're to, you know, get the pumping levels down to where they're safe,
Absolutely.
I mean, that number's going to be too high.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, we really need to be prudent with the use of that number and looking out.
Right. I could not agree with you more. That's why each year we ask you to confirm it, but I think we need to move to a slightly longer horizon, hence the study session discussion.
No, I would concur. I think we really need to look at it.
Any other questions? I have one that is on the topic, but not directly on the budget. But when we talk about budget reserve designations, do you know when GASB 54 is going to be applying to us?
I do not, but we'll certainly get that information to you.
The reason is, after that, these things like sequestered for gems won't be allowed anymore. They'll have to be the standard things of non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, or unassigned.
We'll certainly go to ground on that.
And so the sooner we get it into our budget, the better.
When's that effective?
Well, it depends on the size of the agency. I'm involved with two other agencies. One it was last year, one it's this year. So I don't know. We're pretty small compared to, comparatively. So.
And GASB is coming because APCD, we're looking at it too. And,
right.
And some other.
Yeah, so we just need to get prepared.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We'll certainly get an answer to that and brief the board.
Okay.
I did fail to the one your earlier action on the LLC, the peak contract added another 4,900, so you need to, in terms of this budget, give us direction to do one of two things: either modify it to include it or fund it out of as the first draw against the 100,000 contingency for the 11-12 budget, assuming you approve that. So just keep that in mind when you're fashioning your motion.
All right.
I just wanted to ask, Madam Chairman, in your travels, do you deal anywhere where they do a 2-year budget?
Yes.
That seems to me that would be helpful to have.
But they still have a single-year audit.
Correct. But the budget, if we were moving forward with a 2-year budget, you know, then we can start putting the brake on a bit sooner. Anyway.
Okay. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to us on this item? Hey guys, you're going to have to speak soon because we're not doing number 7. You're going to go a whole meeting without any. Oh no, we did. We had Mr. Perello. Okay.
Charlotte, just
Yes.
want to make, on a 2-year budget, it's a projection. It's when we used to do it at United, it's very, even when we didn't have all the SA issues and Recovery Act issues, it's like a 70% document to look at. It's not really that tangible to move. You just got a trend. And I'm just pointing that out for as far as use of staff time.
Right.
It may not be, they got the message, you've got to be careful with the numbers you're using for your revenue numbers, because we obviously got to lower our pumping. So it's just, I think that's the main message you want to put out, get the biggest bang for the buck we can.
You still have that many changes.
I'd just like to put the brakes on before you get ready to hit the bridge, you know?
Yes.
I know when I was with the City of Oxnard had 2-year budgets, but you also have mid-year adjustments, and then you look at it again, and the first year, and then you can adjust accordingly. And it's just, that budget is just a roadmap that you can adjust accordingly, so.
Okay. What are the wishes of the board? And we need to include how we're going to account for the 4,900 that we voted for earlier.
I think Gerard's contingency can take care of that.
Okay.
I wish you wouldn't.
You'll only have 96 left in there.
I wish you wouldn't say that. I have enough trouble with my staff colleagues to say it's my budget. So.
Was that a motion of some sort, or just a suggestion to the person who's going to make the motion? Okay, would you like to make a motion?
I move that we cause the 4,600, is it not?
49, I believe.
The 4,900 to be sourced from the reserve fund.
Okay, and is that with recommending
And
that?
with that, then we approve the budget as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 7 has been carried forward to the next meeting. Next, we get to executive officers' report.
Nothing much to report, except that we are reviewing a number of urban water management plans at this time, and we're still anxiously awaiting that of the city of Oxnard.
It's because we have to get them in. Okay. Motion to receive and file the executive officers' report.
So moved.
Motion and second to receive and file the executive officer's report. Any opposition? Motion carries. Or so ordered, I guess it is. I'm searching here. There we go. That being all of the business before the... Wow, I thought this was going to go for another hour or so. No, meeting's adjourned.